3 months until Election Day, and both Republicans and Democrats are struggling with poor public perception. And while Republicans face significant polling headwinds, a recent survey shows that the Democratic Party's favorability is actually even worse, with nearly 57% of voters viewing it negatively. MS Now congressional reporter Kevin Fry has been digging into that, and he joins us now. Also joining the conversation, the host of Politics Nation on MS Now, the Reverend Al Sharpton. He's also president of the National Action Network. And MS Now national affairs analyst John Heilman. He is partner and chief political columnist at Puck. So, Kevin, let's dig into the reporting here because, look, polls are telling two different stories. On one hand, polls are really favoring Democrats come November. Right. But it seems like a lot of that is perhaps just an anti-Trump sentiment. These numbers suggest Democrats still struggling to make a case for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, and so I talked to 2 or 3 dozen Democrats on Capitol Hill to just try to get their sense of why do these numbers add up the way they do. Because, I mean, you have Trump and the GOP underwater, but certainly the Democratic brand is not exactly, shall we say, golden and shiny either. And they go back to, at the very baseline, this idea of we need to stand for something and not just against something. Now, there are all sorts of other reasons, be it an age question, be it this perception that we come in and we lecture and we don't actually listen to people, that we pretend to be the smartest person in the room. There's also, I spoke to one Democrat who said we've allowed the Republicans to define us too much, that they get away with calling us Democrats as opposed to Democratic Party, emphasis on the rat portion. But at the end of the day, the overwhelming thing I heard from lawmakers was this idea that nobody knows what we want. So here's just a sampling of what we heard.
I think a lot of people aren't sure, depending on where you're from, what it means to be a Democrat. What do we stand for? What are we fighting for, as opposed to what we are against?
We have to listen first and talk second. And I don't think that's something that we over time have done, that we sometimes show up as if we're the smartest people in the room and that we have the plan.
We have to be much more ambitious than just pointing out Donald Trump's failures. I talk a lot about fighting the corruption and the corporate power that has made life more expensive, that has crushed the American dream. I think that ought to be the heart of what we do as Democrats and how we'll win in 26 and I think in 28 as well.
So if this all sounds familiar, it goes back to this idea of affordability is kind of this unifying message. Of course, as we have seen in recent weeks, they're not necessarily all corralled around the same message as to what affordability should really look like and how exactly you bring about that affordability on the campaign trail. The other thing that Democrats, some will candidly admit, is that part of their issue is they know, based on talking to voters and based on the polling, that voters want the party to be a group of fighters. And there's only so much you can do when you're in the minority. As one lawmaker put it, they want us to be laying in front of the bulldozer, and we simply just can't be doing that.
So, Rev, I mean, you know these lawmakers. You're obviously, your voice carries some influence in the party. When you see these numbers that the Democrats, sure, they've done a good job opposing Trump, particularly in the last year, after being sort of shell-shocked for the first couple months of his term. How do they make the more assertive case for themselves so they can turn around public perception of the party?
No, I think that they must be perceived more as fighting and leading the fight against Trump, rather than saying, "Oh, hold on, I'm running to catch up with the front line of my troops. They're marching without me." But I also think part of what Kevin and others that are analyzing this must look at is part of the Democratic Party's perception problem is that they are more democratic than the Republicans. The Republicans kind of like stay in line, where the Democrats do tend to have more internal debate and allow other voices to be heard. So in whatever mild defense I would give of them, even though I want them to be fighters more and stand for something, I would say the fact that you are allowed to dissent in the Democratic Party. You're not allowed to dissent in the Republican Party, so the Republicans get everybody that agrees with them going positive, whereas it dilutes the Democrats' support because one day you're mad, one day you're not mad at your own party because you're allowed to express that more.
To the Reverend's point, one thing that I heard from more than one lawmaker was an invocation of the quote from Will Rogers, which is, "I'm not part of an organized party. I'm a member of the Democratic Party."
Yeah, and Heilman, to that, we're seeing this against the backdrop of a real intra-party debate between moderates and progressives, and we've seen that play out in the primary results the last week or so, and that includes last night in Minnesota and then Wisconsin, where particularly in the Wisconsin gubernatorial race, a real surprise as polls had Francisca Hong up quite a bit. We knew the gap was narrowing, but still a stunning result here that she loses in the end. So give us your takes on last night and what that tells you about the party.
Well, here are the two big takeaways, Jonathan, is that I think if you combine what happened last night with what happened in Michigan a week ago, they're essentially the same result. And by that, I mean, people who thought there was going to be in these two ultra purple, crucial battleground states, very swingy, that you were going to get some clarity about where the Democratic Party was headed on the basis of what happened in these races. We come out with no clarity whatsoever. We come out with two razor thin margins. In one case, the progressive candidate prevails narrowly, very narrowly, and the other, the most progressive candidate in the race, the DSA candidate, loses narrowly. The party is divided, and that doesn't mean it can't be put back together. But the party has a very significant factional split within it, and you saw that play out in these two races. The other thing I'd say is the turnout in this race, like the turnout in Michigan, was off the charts for Democrats. Much more so than for Republicans. In the Michigan Senate race, you had 1.5 million Democrats who voted versus 1 million Republicans who voted on the other side. And that's part of a pattern we've seen over the past 18 months, which is Democratic voters are really eager to vote, whether they are progressives or whether they're normies or establishmentarians or moderates. They are eager to get out and vote, and they're eager to get to the polls in November to try to stop Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans. And so you see two sides to this coin. The party is divided, and yet that what they agree on and what their energy and their motivation is all around is about voting and turning out. And, pollsters talk about that in terms of the enthusiasm advantage that Democrats have. That is real. And again, we've seen it in off-year elections, special elections, all these primaries. Democrats are just way more motivated than Republicans to cast ballots. And that is a very good thing for the Democratic Party. It's one of the big structural factors that's favoring them when we get to November 3rd.
No question. We've seen that enthusiasm gap reflect the number of polls. And we, of course, need to keep in mind Trump voters don't tend to turn out nearly the same way when Trump's name is not actually on the ballot. MS Now's Kevin Fry, thank you. Thank you for bringing that reporting to us.